In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the video timeline panel to animate with a layer style. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to start off just with a background that I've filled in with gray. So we can see we just have our background there in our layers panel. And so we're going to be using a layer style to animate some text. So with that said, I'm going to come over here to my tool panel and I'm going to grab our text tool. And I'm going to be using white as our foreground color to start off with. So with our text tool, I'm just going to make a selection here on our background. Once we've made that selection, we can see that reflected down here in our video timeline panel. This is basically where we're going to animate our text. So let's go ahead and type DT for Digital Tutors, and this font is basically the font used for the most recent Tron film. It is included in your reference files. It's free to distribute as long as you include the text and README files. Okay, let's go ahead and commit to that change. I actually may want to go ahead and just center that. Okay, so what can a layer style do for us? Well, we can use layer styles to basically add some really cool effects and really change up the visual appearance of whatever we have on our layer, whether it's text or an illustration or a sketch or what have you. So to get to our layer style dialog box, we'll double click on the layer containing our text in our layers panel, and here we have our layer style dialog box. So let's go ahead and change up this text just to look a little bit more visually interesting. So we'll just kind of move that over there just so we can see everything. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with a gradient overlay. We can kind of see these changes start to take effect as we start to click on some of these different effects here. And for the style, let's go ahead and switch that to reflected, and we'll come in here to gradient. And basically what I've already prepared is I've taken this gradient and I've just changed the colors and I've saved it right here. This gradient will also be included in your reference files. And feel free to change the colors if you want to. Easily you can just tap on each one of these little boxes right here to go in and change the colors. So let's go ahead and click OK. The next thing I want to focus on is bevel and emboss. Okay, so let's go ahead and change up a few things to really push the overall visual appearance of our text. I'm going to start with technique here. Let's change that to chiseled hard. Okay, and now let's really emphasize that by increasing the depth. I might want to go with about 140. And then let's also go ahead and change up the size. So for the size, I may want to go ahead and take that up to like 10. And so we can kind of start to see a visual change taking there. And then we may want to soften that edge just slightly. We'll take that to 1. We can kind of zoom in there just to kind of see how that's looking. Okay, great. I also want to turn off use global light. So I want to uncheck that. And that's going to allow us a little bit of freedom when we start to animate the light source in the video timeline panel. Okay, so we're going to basically uncheck that so we can have a little bit of freedom in moving that light source around when we animate with it. Now let's go ahead and focus on the drop shadow setting. Okay, and so for our drop shadow setting, we may want to go ahead and adjust the distance. So just kind of taking it up a ways there. That feels about right. Already we've kind of established a little bit of depth and dimension to our text there. And we may want to go ahead and adjust the size as well. So I'll go ahead and take the size up maybe to around the same, maybe 25. Go ahead and put a 5 there. Okay, excellent. Now I also want to go ahead and uncheck use global light as well. So my goal here is to keep the lighting consistent with bevel and emboss and drop shadow. We're basically going to move the light around. You're going to kind of see the shadow change. So we want to see the direction of the light be consistent with the direction in which the shadow is cast. Okay, so let's go ahead and commit to this change. Okay, excellent. So if we look over here in our layers panel, we can now see all of these different effects that we've basically added changing the overall visual look of our text. Okay, so now let's go down to our video timeline panel, and we're going to click on this little disclosure arrow right here next to where it says DT. And we've got these different options down here: transform, opacity, style, text warp. Now we've used transform when we basically transformed and animated our little Papa's Surf Shop logo. And again, we're just going to be using keyframes. A keyframe is going to remember basically the information that we have. In this case, we're going to be using the little stopwatch button for style. So if we click on that, that drops in a keyframe. And so it's going to remember the current state of our logo here. All right. So now what we want to do is basically move forward in time just a little ways. So probably right about there. Okay. So what we want to go ahead and do now is go back into our layer style dialog box. So we'll go ahead and come back over here to our layers panel. We'll double click on the layer containing our text. We're going to go back to bevel and emboss. And we're going to come over here to where it says shading. And I'm going to go ahead and change the direction of the light to about -135. And we can see that basically take effect right there. Okay? Very good. Now let's go ahead and jump to drop shadow. Okay, so we'll go to drop shadow. And we're going to change the angle of the light to basically the exact same thing. So we may want to go ahead and just type that in. I want the lighting and everything to be consistent so that the shadow is cast accordingly to where it matches up with the direction of the light as we animate. So let's go ahead and commit to that change, clicking OK. And you can see that another keyframe has been dropped in place. So if we just kind of scrub through that, we can see that change basically taking place. We can even click play. And that's looking pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and push our animation even further. So what I want to do is have a nice fade in from black as if the light is basically hitting this text, okay? So what we're going to go ahead and do first is make sure we're on our first keyframe here. I'm going to come over here to our layers panel, and I'm going to click on this little visibility icon for effects, and that's basically going to hide everything below. Okay, so now we see our original text just as white. Okay, great. So now I'm going to come right here to this little box. It looks like it's divided, and we're going to grab our fade with black transition. We're going to drop that right onto our text, and I'm going to probably want to shrink that down, or trim that down rather, just a little ways. And we want our text to basically, we want this entire scene, let's go ahead and actually zoom out here. We want our entire scene to look like the light is basically revealing the text and changing the direction of the shadow being cast, okay? So what we need to do is also fade in the background as well. So we have our default background, and that's not going to show up in our timeline at all. So what we actually need to do is come over to our background in our layers panel. We'll right click, and we're going to go to layer from background. So once we do this, we'll just go ahead and let it say layer 0. We can see that added into our timeline, okay? So now we can come back to our transitions. We'll do a fade with black. I'm going to go ahead and bring that to where it's pretty consistent. So I'm just kind of snapping it to my current time indicator so they're both pretty consistent there. And so now if we play, we can see that nice fade in. So very cool. Now, just previewing it like this, we don't really see it at its full true speed. So let's go ahead and bring up the final rendered video for our animated text. And so with our final render video up here, we can go ahead and click play. And there we can see how it looks, just looking a lot more smooth. And so this video will actually also be included in your reference files as well. So this is just a really cool way to basically play around and animate with some layer styles. Just go in there and really kind of tweak all the settings and just see and experiment how you can get them to move around just using some keyframes here in the video timeline. Now I do want to point out that it's a lot easier to animate with one layer style, going in and basically adding different effects. You can sometimes run into a few complications if you try to mix two different layer styles, just two completely different sets of effects. So to really illustrate this, we could actually come forward in time just a little ways there, dragging our current time indicator. We could come over here to where it says FX and grab just kind of one of these pre-made layer styles. We could grab this one right here. You'll notice how it drops another keyframe, okay? And so if we wanted to jump back to the previous keyframe, just hitting that little arrow there, we could click play. We can see a nice transition happening, but in the frame just right before, on the frame just right before that keyframe, we have this awkward jump. And so sometimes you'll run into that depending on how you combine different layer styles. So just kind of be leery of that. Sometimes it's hard to get around issues like that. So in this case, I probably wouldn't mix this layer style with what we have already. But it's looking pretty cool. I'm liking how it's looking. We may go ahead and just delete that layer style. So just hitting delete on our keyboard. Okay, excellent. So in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and change gears once again. And we're going to talk about animating frame by frame using the frame animation panel here in Photoshop. So stick around and we'll see you in the next lesson.